Hi everybody, I'm Brian Romo with PKI Solutions, and this is Minding the Key Store. I'm your shopkeeper as always, and we have another archive from the vault. Today we have a presentation from Mark Cooper from 2019 where he talks about root of trust chains at scale. How do you handle multiple root certificate authorities and manage them in a way that's secure and easier to manage than stacks of machines, in a shelving unit or in a rack? And he explores some of the risks with traditional approaches and then some of the features and benefits of leveraging something like a FutureX appliance and getting that in place for your root certificate authority needs. As always, if you like this presentation or anything else that you see on the channel, we would love it if you would do the YouTube things, like, share, subscribe, hit the bell notification icon to let you know when we're going live. We just started going live last week, and we would love to have you participate more. We're going to be leaning into our spooky October stories in the upcoming couple of weeks, so we hope you'll join us and celebrate the month of spooky things in PKI. Without further ado, here is our next Vault presentation, Managing the Root of Trust at Scale.
Hello, I'm Mark Cooper, President and Founder of PKI Solutions, and today I'm going to be talking about the topic of managing the root of trust at scale. The intent is to talk about the challenges of a large PKI infrastructure where we're potentially dealing with a large number of root and or policy CAs in an offline configuration, and the challenges that organizations are going to face with that many systems that are offline. And we're going to talk about a unique aspect of the FutureX product line and its ability to manage these certificate authorities at scale with a very small infrastructure footprint. PKI Solutions was started in 2014 after I left Microsoft, where I was focused exclusively on the PKI space. While I was there, I became known as the PKI guy, and I really had a desire to go back to a consulting role where I can work more directly with customers on a long-term basis. At PKI Solutions, we focus on a number of areas. However, all of those areas are explicitly around PKI and related systems. We do consulting work around architecture, design, and deployment. We provide support services, and training is a very large part of what we do. We offer both in-person open enrollment courses around the world, as well as private deliveries on-site at companies. And now we are also offering our courses online in a self-paced process. We work with a number of partner organizations around the world to help provide a channel for their products, as well as offering training and support services to partners that need assistance in achieving their PKI project needs. One of the important areas that I often begin any talk or training when discussing PKI is the fact that a lot of organizations do not take a concerted and deep enough thought process into the security and the infrastructure of their environment when using a PKI. I often say that you can wind up introducing more and greater risks to your environment if your PKI isn't designed and deployed in a proper manner. What I mean by that is when we go through a process of doing a simple click, 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 next install kind of process with a PKI, where someone's simply going through a GUI and not really thinking about the underlying security controls that are in place, they can actually wind up setting up the organization to have a greater number of risks. When it comes to PKI, there is no way to make all risks go away inside of an organization. In fact, there is no way to eliminate every IT risk. All that we can really do is attempt to modify or change that risk into some other type of form that we can control. So for example, if we think about users and usernames and passwords and their access to a Wi-Fi and VPN network, there are a large number of risks associated with that type of authentication, whether it's someone having their password guessed, socially engineered or stolen, or even just a lending of those credentials to someone else. That all represents a risk to the organization. When we introduce a PKI, we can mitigate some of those risks, and we can have users authenticating to a Wi-Fi network, for instance, without the use of their username and passwords. We can provide a greater authentication control to them with the use of a certificate. However, that risk that was formerly associated with their identity doesn't magically disappear. It just is moved to another place. And what I mean by that is that risk is now placed onto the certificate authorities themselves. If we have CAs that we've deployed in our environment that haven't been secured or managed properly, that now represents a greater concentrated risk to our organization than that individual's username and password did. In fact, if a user had their credentials compromised previously, we could always disable that user account, we could reset their password. But now with a PKI, if I'm not managing that CA properly, and I've now moved all of that risk onto the CA, if someone compromises that CA, they can now exert greater compromise on my organization because now they can impersonate anyone, including administrators. The value of using a PKI and putting that risk onto our CAs is the fact that that becomes a much more tangible thing. If I have a single source that has absorbed all of that risk, and that is a physical server sitting in my data center behind a locked cabinet and is not on the network, and I have security cameras and card controls to get to it, I have a much better way of managing that risk as it sits on top of my CA than it ever did when it was just a username and password out in the wild. So we really need to make sure that when we are working with a PKI, that we are managing the risks and we're understanding what we're introducing into our environment. So to make sure that we're all getting started with an equal knowledge set, let's talk a little bit about what a PKI is. A public key infrastructure is really a series of discrete components that have all been brought together to offer us the ability to provide data encryption and identity systems. There are really several different roles that you need to understand in order to get an idea of what is involved inside of our PKI. At the very center of this, we have digital certificates, and these are the items that are being given to users and to computers to provide some way of identifying who and what they are. This is much like a driver's license that you would have that identifies you as a unique individual. Digital certificates are a cryptographic file that provide a mechanism where we can digitally assert who and what an identity is, and this can be done with any type of centralized authoritative source having to verify each time a certificate is being used. The certificate has all of the information that's needed in order to validate it. We have certificate authorities that are responsible for issuing these certificates. In the driver's license analogy, this is much like the Department of Motor Vehicles. A certificate authority is a server or a computer that has been configured to be trusted to issue these identities, and it will have several responsibilities from having some type of process to physically or virtually identify who it's making a certificate for, managing those certificates, and making sure that anyone that needs to validate those certificates will be able to find the information on the network or the internet in order to validate that identity. We have abstract things such as policies and procedures. These are written documentations that define how the CA and the PKI itself will be maintained, how it will be operated, the types of security controls and the governance and the issuance of certificates will all be defined inside of these policy documents. Lastly, we have applications and operating systems that have been configured or written to support the use of certificates for identity and data encryption. This could be everything from a Windows OS or an iPhone. It can be applications that enable us to connect to a VPN or a Wi-Fi, or even our email systems that are used to enable us to encrypt emails. All of these components, when brought together, give us a public key infrastructure that enable us to issue and use certificates for identity and data encryption. How are public key infrastructures being used inside of organizations? There's a number of areas that we'll find that organizations are taking advantage of certificates for identity and data protection. One of the primary areas is around securing information itself. And this often takes the form of protecting files, whether that's encrypting a file as it sits on a disk or as it sits inside of a database, or even as it moves across the network. The most common way that we see this are things like websites where you go to an HTTPS location. That is a TLS certificate that proves the identity of the website, but also provides a bootstrap encryption that enables that web browser to have a unique session to that website, and all the information that's transmitted is encrypted. We can also use this certificate to encrypt emails that are sent from one recipient to the other. We can also use it to validate identities. And this is when we start talking about things like signing. And this isn't necessarily like a virtual signature of your handwritten style. We're talking about signing identity information. This can often take the place of things like code signing, where we're trying to prove who actually created a script or an executable. We can use a hashing algorithm process to digest the contents of the file, so we know what the contents looked like when the document was signed. And then we can digitally use our certificate to sign that content, whether that's a file or an email. And then the recipient is able to reverse that process and determine if the contents have been manipulated or changed in transit. And they can also determine, did it really come from a particular individual? So as we hear about things like business email compromise, where hackers are sending fraudulent emails to recipients, one of the things that we can do to help prevent and block those types of attacks is by using certificates and signing those emails. We have another measure that we can determine, did that email really come from a particular individual? The signing provides us also the ability to encrypt information in addition to just signing it. When we encrypt information, we're digitally obscuring that content so it can't be examined by someone who's watching a network packet be transmitted, or as a file is sitting in a particular place. So signing and encryption can be brought together where we're trying to determine who is creating content, and then we can encrypt those contents to keep someone from reading it. Or sometimes we simply need to sign something where we want to be able to determine the author and what the contents were when the signature occurred, and we don't necessarily have a need to encrypt that. A good example of that would be if an executive needed to send an email out to the company. We don't necessarily need to encrypt the contents, but we may want to make sure that all the employees know that that really did come from that executive, and the contents that they see in the email were exactly as they were when they left that executive's mailbox. Where do we see PKI being used in a common organization today? The most common use of certificates that we see are organizations using identities to secure who's connecting to their network. And this can be both their Wi-Fi network or a VPN network. These both offer mechanisms for someone to potentially anonymously or very remotely access a corporation's network. So these two entry points represent a large risk to most organizations, and typical usernames and passwords don't have adequate controls in modern times to really protect an organization against these threats. So it's very easy for organizations to use a PKI to protect these types of entry points. In addition, we can also use certificates to protect physical networks, the actual Ethernet inside of a building, for instance. Well, a lot of organizations don't necessarily give careful consideration to is the fact that every conference room and desk inside of their organization, and oftentimes even the receptionist location, has Ethernet ports that are directly connected to the rest of the network. One of the things that presents a risk to the organization is what prevents an adversary from plugging in a computer to one of those ports and getting access to all of those network resources. A lot of organizations place a lot of security protections on the entry point from the internet and remote locations, but don't always give careful consideration to those network ports inside of a building. With the use of certificates, we can use 802.1x authentication processes where even when a computer plugs into that local port, they're not able to actually access the main network until they've been able to present a certificate to prove that they really are an organizational computer. And then once that identity process is completed, they're allowed to access the rest of the corporate resources. We also see certificates being used for data encryption. The most common types are files on a local disk, as well as email and databases. The ability to encrypt information protects organizations in case there is a compromise, that even if information is removed from the organization, it's an encrypted state in such a way that an adversary is not going to be able to read the information. It provides an additional protection, assuming that someone is actually able to get inside of the network. It also protects against inadvertent information disclosure if a resource is left open or employee accesses information that they weren't intended. If their information is encrypted and prevents them from being able to read the information, it's held to a much higher security standard. We also see certificates being used for network level communications with IPsec that provides a point-to-point or a point-to-site tunnel process where all the information is encrypted. This provides an added layer, especially when we have networks that are traversing the internet. We can use an IPsec connection to make sure that anyone that happens to be monitoring that connection isn't able to discern information that's being transmitted. Code signing is another common one that we're seeing now as more organizations get cognizant of the threat against PowerShell and batch files, as well as rogue executables that are downloaded off of the internet. With code signing, organizations can examine executables and scripts, determine if they're safe, and then use their own locally issued code signing certificate to denote that that item is safe. And then through the use of Active Directory policies or other controls, can actually limit computers' abilities to run scripts and executables that aren't signed by the organization. This provides a gatekeeper functionality where an organization has a much greater control that they can exert over their resources for what devices and applications can run which scripts and which executables. Another very common use of certificates in organizations is the use of SSL and TLS certificates for web encryption. It's one of the leading reasons why a lot of organizations even start with the PKI. These TLS certificates are often used for other purposes, such as appliances and routers. We also see them for Radius servers. So these server authentication types of certificates are a very common scenario for us inside of the organization. The other branch that we see is in the manufacturing space with the Internet of Things. A lot of manufacturers now are creating smart devices that connect to either local networks or even to the internet and have either a need to transmit data back to a central host, the ability to update themselves with internet firmware, or even to be controlled through some command and control system or browser control. In order to make sure that those devices are uniquely identified and as secure as possible, many manufacturers are actually including certificate identities at the time of manufacture. So by the time they get to a company's network or they're deployed inside of a residential location, there's already a strong identity associated with those devices, and they can make sure that they're doing their best to protect the information as it's transmitted, as well as making sure that no rogue devices are downloading and updating firmware, and they're able to protect their customer ecosystem. There's a number of really interesting areas where PKI is being used to combat a number of new and advanced technology threats. One of those is the shake and stir framework that's being used to combat robocalls and caller ID spoofing. Defined as a global standard by the Alliance for Telecommunications Industry Solutions, ADCS, the shake and stir framework at its core uses PKI to identify the caller of every phone call so that the originator and the recipient of a call can have validated identity of who's originating a call, and will help prevent unwanted robocalls and caller ID spoofing by providing an authoritative source for caller ID information. We're also seeing PKI certificates being used in aircraft from Boeing and Airbus, that all of the individual components use certificate-based identities to ensure that they're talking to authenticated devices within the aircraft to prevent malicious attacks, as well as unwanted communications and interference from other systems. We also see certificates being used by the Gaming Standards Alliance, which defines the standards and security practices for lottery machines, video poker machines, and other types of gaming devices inside of casinos and lottery systems. We also have a lot of certificates being used in the energy sector for smart meters, both for electric and gas, where residential meters are using wireless communications and certificates to provide billing and usage information back to the provider. We also are seeing a lot of dependency in the near horizon with the 5G wireless communication standard, where all of the components will have TLS and other types of certificate identities present in all of the components to ensure that the 5G communications network is as secure as it possibly can be. So the certificates themselves, if we dig a little deeper, when we start talking about a certificate that's been issued to a user or computer, there's a number of components that you need to be aware of when it comes to these certificates. Inside of the certificate is going to be information that was included by the issuer. Typically, this is the certificate authority. And it's going to include information such as the identity it was issued to, and properties such as the validity period for the certificate, how the certificate can be used, in what context can it be used, how long will it be valid for. A lot of these things will be defined by the certificate authority when the certificate itself is issued. Once a certificate has been created by a CA, prior to giving it to the entity, the certificate authority needs to make sure that the information inside of that certificate isn't going to be compromised or changed after it's been issued. To do that, the CA is going to sign that certificate. This is accomplished because of the fact that the CA has its own certificate that was created when the CA was first installed or it was recently renewed on the CA. The CA is going to use its certificate and cryptographic keys to put a cryptographic envelope around any certificate it issues out. This is called a signature. That signature includes information about the contents of the certificate and who issued it. That way, once it leaves the CA, there is cryptographic details that will give any application the ability to detect if that certificate has been tampered with after it was issued from the CA. This is what makes sure that our identity stays protected. This is similar to how the Motor Vehicles Department is going to put tamper-resistant indicators on a driver's license, whether that's something as simple as some lamination around the driver's license, embedded holograms, or other details embedded within the driver's license that will make it easier to detect if the license has been tampered with or a photo has been changed. This is being done by our certificate authority using cryptographic keys to accomplish the same process. So what is the value of a certificate authority? Well, one of the complications we have with just using certificates is if a certificate was issued by an individual themselves, who's going to actually trust that an unknown entity is actually creating a valid certificate identity? Even if we were able to explicitly have that trust, meaning I know the individual on the other side of a conversation I want to have, and we have a conversation ahead of time, and I actually know that that really is who they say they are, and they create a certificate, and we verbally verified all those things back and forth. It took a lot of bandwidth and a lot of time to make that verification process. Plus, all I really accomplished was a mutual exchange. Only myself and that other entity are now able to trust each other's identities. How do we do that at scale? How do we get to a point where I can trust thousands or millions of certificates without having to explicitly trust each and every single one of those? And that's where certificate authority provides our ability to do this at scale. In order for a PKI to work, we have to define some type of an explicit trust. And what I mean by that is in your operating system or application that will be using certificates, you must have something that has explicitly said which PKIs you wish to trust, whether that's a publicly issued CA that's being managed in a commercial space or a private individual CA inside of your own organization. Something must make an explicit trust. This is typically an administrator of the operating system or the organization that will take a copy of that CA certificate and add it to a trusted store or a trusted configuration inside of the operating system or application that defines that as an explicitly trusted CA. When we have that explicit trust of a CA, we implicitly trust everything it does. So if I can trust a root CA and it winds up subsequently issuing out thousands of certificates, well, all of those certificates are implicitly trusted by me because I explicitly trusted the CA. This gives me the ability to scale this, that no matter how many certificates that CA issues, they're automatically trusted by my application or by my operating system. Now, obviously, we would only want to explicitly trust CAs that we know are trustworthy, either CAs that we directly manage ourselves, or sometimes this is done on our behalf. So in the case of Windows, for instance, Microsoft has a program where they will vet and audit certificate authorities that sell certificates, and they want to be trusted inside of the operating system. They will actually subject themselves to a Microsoft audit, and if they pass all of the qualification processes, Microsoft will explicitly include their CA certificate in the operating system, so they're trusted, and then your operating system implicitly trusts everything that they do. Leveraging this concept of a certificate authority, we'll find that most PKIs follow one of three different tiering models. And by tiering, we refer to the number of certificate authorities in a parent and child relationship. These will typically be referred to as a 3-tier, 2-tier, and a single tier. The single tier, honestly, we tend to use in very tactical solutions, test environments, dev environments, not something that we typically see in a usual enterprise production environment. The 2-tier and 3-tier are all capable of issuing the same types of certificates to users and computers. The 3-tier give us some additional controls over the PKI as far as what the issuing CA is allowed to issue, even if these are managed by separate teams. Going back to the concept of explicit trust, we typically explicitly trust the top layers of these PKIs, and we call these root CAs. They're also sometimes called the root of trust. By trusting a root CA, we implicitly trust everything below it, which means all of the CA, such as a policy CA and issuing CA below it, are implicitly trusted, and all of the certificates they issue to users and computers are implicitly trusted. So by standing up a multi-tier PKI, we're typically trying to accomplish some type of management of the PKI, but it doesn't result in any more additional work that we need on our client's behalf. If they trust a root, they're going to trust everything below it. We have models where in the modern era, a lot of systems are moving to the cloud, and PKI is no exception. However, there isn't a lot of compelling options that present a method to use the cloud and PKI in a secure manner. We do work with customers of implementing scenarios where we could potentially include the cloud in our deployment model. This is an example of something that we often give to customers that kind of show our 3-tier PKI. We have a root and policy CA connecting to an issuing CA inside of the cloud. That introduces a number of risks, and some of the things that we can do to manage those risks are by using hardware security modules to protect these CAs, where we can physically secure the cryptographic keys that protect these certificate authorities. We also have an issuing CA that's not in the cloud that we'll put on premises. So if something does happen at the cloud layer, the internal use of certificates is not affected. And then our CA that is in the cloud, we can either leverage an HSM on premises or even use a cloud provided HSM, whether that's native within AWS or Azure, or even a third-party HSM service such as Encipher or FutureX. Those can provide HSM services on a virtual basis. While we have methods that we could potentially include the cloud in our architecture, there hasn't been a strong case for areas that we can provide a lot of security benefits from including it. So we will still find the majority of our PKIs deployed in premises and then potentially issuing certificates to entities that are in the cloud. With our tiering model, we can see that there's a number of different ways that organizations may choose to break up their certificate authority, whether it's by separating CAs by the type of certificates that they're going to issue, such as secure email and TLS and VPN types of certificates. Typically, we'll see these separations in organizations that either need to spread the risk so that if one CA was compromised, not all of their certificate types are affected. It could be separate groups are managing these CAs and they want to have independent controls over their identities and certificates that they're issuing. They don't want to combine these into one. We may also have multiple CAs in organizations with a large number of locations like New York, London, and Singapore. We can place CAs closer to users and computers in each of those regions by having a separate CA physically residing there. And we may also see portions of the business being divided up. For instance, defense and aerospace and aircraft may be divided with different certificate authorities for regulatory requirements or partner trust requirements that will oftentimes take our PKI tiering model and have multiple CAs deployed to meet different organization and business needs. Again, because we explicitly trust a root the majority of the time, whenever we stand up these subordinate CAs, they are implicitly trusted. And additionally, everything that those CAs issue is also trusted. What is the scaling issue? What is the problem that we're going to run into? In the tiering models we've shown a very simple model where we have a typical root CA and a policy CA and an issuing CA, or maybe even just a two-tier where we have a single root and a single issuing CA. As we get into larger organizations, or even organizations that have specific needs, such as managed service providers or organizations where they need a large number of distinct PKIs for business separation, regulatory requirements, privacy requirements, regional and geographic separation, we may have a large number of PKI environments that we need to manage. As we start adding more of these CAs and more of these infrastructure, the complexity and cost increases. We start including things like additional roles and separations and assignments and card controls and passwords. If we need to operate these distinctly, as we add more and more of those systems, we wind up investing in a greater amount of hardware, a greater complexity when it comes to security. A lot of these systems, such as the root and policy CAs, are air-gapped and off of the network, which means they have to be managed in person, physically present at the computer. If we're trying to do that at scale, that becomes a very difficult thing to do. We can also take a look at the issue of go-to-market time. If I need to deploy a large number of distinct PKIs in order to deliver services to my customers or to meet my business needs, if I have to stand up all that infrastructure and hardware security module, that's going to greatly impact my ability to execute on it. Beyond just the deployment and the complexity is the ongoing management of the infrastructure. If I've got one CA to manage, what's the complexity of 6? What's the complexity of 12 or 24? This becomes a much greater issue that we have to face in larger and at scale environments. So for instance, if in this case I wind up having to deploy 4 distinct PKIs in my environment for separation of PKI within my business units or geography, if we take a look at the complexity of what I'm having to deploy here, I've got 4 distinct root CAs and hardware security modules. Each one of those is going to be configured uniquely. They're going to have local policies and controls. There's going to be security that's deployed around there. There's operating systems that have to be managed. There's infrastructure and stand-up cost. Same thing with my policy CAs. I have to stand up a policy CA for each one of these and associated hardware security modules. Those HSMs are going to have to get configured. I'm going to need rack space. I have an operating system to manage, and then all of my issuing CAs. So just by doing a small scaling issue here, I can quickly see that I'm going to have 16, 20, 40, 50 different types of CAs that I'm going to have to manage in order to do this at scale. So what is something that we can do to make this a little more manageable? And that is something that's unique about the FutureX product line. What initially attracted me to the FutureX product line is how they distinctly look at a certificate authority different than some of the other options that are available to me as an architect. When FutureX thinks about a certificate authority, they really look at their appliance as creating cryptographic keys and certificates. It does not make a distinction on how many certificates that appliance can make, which means I can, in theory, have a single FutureX KMES product that I've deployed in my environment. And inside of that box, that is both a CA and an HSM in one, I can create multiple certificates for signing. And then within each one of those certificates, I can then sign subordinate certificates underneath it. So inside of a single KMES product, I can actually create 4 different root certificates. And then subsequently, I can create 4 policy CA certificates with the restrictions I want and have them signed by one of the 4 root CAs. So inside of that appliance, I'm able to have my root CA and my policy CA for all 4 different environments under one appliance. Now, I'm going to have issues if I have to have physical separation of where these things reside, such as a NERC SIP environment or other types of regulatory requirements. But if I'm able to have an air-gapped consolidation of these things, these are 4 distinct CAs with distinct keys. Their policy CAs are also distinct certificates and signing keys. And when I then stand up my issuing CAs in my environments, they'll be signed by their corresponding policy CA, which is inside of the KMS product. What this affords me the ability is now, instead of deploying 12 CAs and 12 HSMs, I can really have a single KMS product with multiple signing certificates that represent my different PKI roots and policy CAs, subsequently issuing certificates to my issuing CAs that are inside of my customer networks, different business units or geographies, all without adding the additional complexity of a large number of offline air-gapped systems. I'm able to do this in a very consolidated manner. Now, in some ways, I can also consolidate this a little further. I could potentially have a issuing CA sitting inside of the KMS. I am not able to take 4 different issuing CAs and put them inside of the KMS and have that issuance, but I could have one of them inside of there. So this provides me a nice way of consolidating a large number of certificate authorities when I'm doing this at scale. It also potentially gives me the ability where I can have a PKI in a box if I need to place something at a customer premise. I can have a large number of roots and policy CAs being managed at a central managed service providers organization, and then a number of distinct CAs in a discrete deployment that I can place at each customer site. That gives me the ability to have a common set of security controls and a much smaller footprint that I have to place at each customer site. So the benefit of the FutureX KMS product is the fact that it has the ability to have multiple issuing root policy CAs all inside of one physical box and operate them as discrete signing certificates without having to deploy a large number of hardware security modules and operating systems to support each of those individual CA processes. This is accomplished because of the fact that the signing certificates are abstracted from the operating system as an individual entity. The KMS product simply has multiple CAs that are available for signing purposes. It will be up to the administrator or whoever is performing the key ceremony processes to make sure that they use the proper certificate when they do a signing, but this will allow a single box to perform multiple roles. It also enables me to have this one appliance in an air-gapped scenario where my root and my policy CAs are maintained in a highly secure environment, kept off of the network with strong security, physical and logical controls, auditing rights, and so forth. Now, obviously, if they're going to be on the same box, it's going to be subject to the same set of controls. So we would want to make sure that we don't have any kind of regulatory or business requirements where we do have to have these separated either from an access control, roles, physical locations, or protections. But if we're simply doing this to have discrete PKIs and I can do this at scale inside of my single KMS product, then there's a lot of value there. The other advantage to this is simply a reduced cost. If I'm able to purchase a single KMS product and have multiple CAs running inside of that single device, I don't have to deploy a large number of HSMs. I don't have to deploy a large number of operating systems that I have to configure and maintain and have capital expenditure for lifetime replacement issues. The cost associated with maintaining and operating each of those individual CAs is reduced because I'm working with a single appliance. So the ability to do this at scale is not only a smaller infrastructure and easier management, it makes it much easier for me to deploy the technology where I don't have to set up and have a long lead time in order to set up a new PKI infrastructure for a new customer. The scenarios where we're going to find the need to be able to do PKI at scale is going to vary based on business needs, but a few of the most common things that we'll see are regulatory requirements of certain parts of a business, operating identities and encryption separate from others. The regulations will have to allow you to consolidate this onto single physical devices, but from a logical layer, the CAs and the PKIs themselves will be distinct from each other, and certificates and identities issued from one will not be trusted by the other because they will be signed by different signing keys. We can also have the same thing if we're operating PKI for a number of subsidiaries or partner organizations where they won't be maintaining their own PKI, but we do want to have that as a distinct PKI separate from a corporate one or other customers or other businesses. We can consolidate that within our KMES product. We may also have other regional or national and geographic issues relating to privacy, information protection, how identity proofing and keys and data encryption sizes will be permitted. By having different PKIs within that KMES product, we can service those different regions and locations with a discrete signing certificate for each one of those. We can also accomplish some things around dev, test, QA, and production if we have all of these sitting inside of our KMES product. Now, I'm not advocating that you take a production KMES server and treat it like a QA device, but if I need to have a certificate to represent a root CA inside of a QA environment or a dev environment, there's no reason why I couldn't create a separate signing certificate from my production system and use it just in that dev environment. The value there is now I don't have to stand up additional equipment just in the dev environment or QA to test something. It will perhaps be operated in a lower security stance within the dev environment, but we would be generating that root CA or subordinate CA certificate in a higher security environment, being our production environment. We wouldn't want to have a dev KMS product that's treated with very low security controls issuing a production signing certificate. The other thing that provides value for us with this is a lot of organizations are starting to face new challenges around SSL, TLS inspection appliances. These are devices like the Palo Alto, Blue Coat, and Checkpoint systems that provide outbound TLS inspection. In order for them to function, they need to operate as a trusted subordinate CA within your organization because they're really acting as a man in the middle. They'll create a certificate on the fly for whatever website a browser is trying to reach. As a result of it creating that certificate, it has access to the key, and it acts as a man in the middle and decrypts all of the information coming from that client before it actually reaches the internet. In order for that to work, it needs to function like a CA, which means its key is going to be trusted just like any other CA in the environment. By using something like the KMS product, if I needed to deploy this, I can actually spin up a policy CA very quickly. And with a policy CA, I can restrict what that Palo Alto or Blue Coat appliance is allowed to do. And rather than it being trusted as a full certificate authority, I can issue it a certificate as a CA, but that CA will only be trusted to issue server authentication certificates. So it greatly reduces the risk that's associated with that device becoming compromised. Thank you for tuning in and watching this re-recorded session of our FutureX and VirtueCrypt presentation of managing PKI at scale. We hope that this has been a valuable presentation for you. And if you have any questions, we invite you to reach out to us on our website, and we'll be happy to respond.